right, so I am here with Father Jonathan and Luther from the Transfigured Life.
What's
Today we're going
up?
to talk about our transfigured lives, how
Mm,
Orthodoxy has changed our lives. We're going to talk about, just practically speaking, what has changed in our lives since becoming Orthodox, how it's affected our lives, and you know, I thought, you guys have a channel called The Transfigured Life. Surely they would have covered this by now, and you haven't. So I'm going to interview you about it and steal it from me. So, for people who
that's
don't know you, do you mind introducing yourselves? What is The Transfigured Life?
Luther, go ahead.
all right. So the Transfigured Life, it is a channel. It's one of the channels that Father Jonathan and I started about God, church, and culture from an Orthodox Christian perspective. And Father Jonathan and I, we kind of see this as like a apologetic, not apologetics. I'm sorry, more of an evangelistic kind of effort. Even though there is elements of, I guess, apologetics in there or whatnot. But ultimately, like, we want to see people come to the faith. We want people to know Christ. We want people to come to the Orthodox Church. We feel like that's the fullness of the faith, and so that's where that endeavor came from. It's crazy. I don't know. Have I ever shared behind the scenes like how that story came about to you, Bailey, or how we
I don't
started
think
the
so.
Church for Your Life? Okay, I won't go into too much detail, but basically, I'll just say. Father Jonathan and I, we've always had like this virtual relationship for a while. And Father Jonathan has been like a virtual spiritual father to me. So we've actually never met in person, but he's been there early on, even when I was an inquirer. And one thing I really appreciate about him is he reached out to me. He saw that I was very zealous or whatever that means. And he was like, he was like, he kind of took me under his wing. He's like, let me take the little lad under his wing, give him some support there in what he's doing. But he reached out to me and was like, if you have any questions about Orthodox Christianity, I'd be happy to help you. We can hop on a Zoom call. And I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. Like, I'm just a brother from the hood of South Florida, and he wants to, hop on a Zoom call with me and work things out. So crazy thing is, we actually hopped on a Zoom call, answered a lot of my questions. Even a brother that was at my old Protestant church just happened to be coming to my house that day when we decided to have that Zoom call. And now that brother's Orthodox, and he got to meet Father Jonathan as well. I'm not saying he became Orthodox because of the Zoom call, but but he got to meet Father Jonathan. So Father Jonathan's an amazing guy. I have a lot of respect for him. He's hilarious, has hilarious dad jokes on Facebook. But yeah, that's how the Transfigured Life started. But my name's Luther. I'm a family man. Love my family, love the faith. And that's a little bit about me and Orthodoxy. So.
Well, Luther's being very kind and generous, talking all about me as if I had anything to do with the channel called The Transfigured Life. He actually contacted me and said, "Father, let's do a channel." And he got me interested. He picked the name, and really, I give an awful lot of credit to Luther. He's really the really was the inspiration behind the starting. I didn't think I was going to ever get involved in podcasting. I thought, oh my God, what do I know about that kind of stuff? There's all these other people out there that are doing so good at it, and maybe one day we will too. But what happened was Luther and I met through Facebook, and we did have that talk and things like that, and then we got paired to appear together as a team on a channel called Gospel Coalition or Gospel Truth, I forget.
It was a conversation on Sola Scriptura with two Lutherans about, I think it's called the Gospel Truth.
Yeah. And so we met preparing for that. I mean, we really got to know each other preparing for that. I'm sure if I recall correctly, we wiped the other team off the face of the earth. I may not be remembering it that well, but it was really fun preparing.
Right.
and talking and conversing about, hey, what are we going to say and how are we going to say it? I think that actually set everything up for us working on the Transfigured Life later on. And I got to tell you all, if you watch the Transfigured Life and you think, wow, those guys are prepared, they got good answers, that's wait, wrong one. Okay, that's all because he puts a lot of time into thinking about what we should say and things like that. So Luther's really just developing, I think, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to work with him is I'm an old guy, I'm going to be dead soon, but he's going to be around for a while, and I want him to really be able to blossom and bloom and shine and all that, because we need a new generation. We need a younger generation of men coming into this and knowing how to podcast, knowing how to use social media to the church's advantage, and be able to argue and to be able to highlight and discuss and all the things we try and do in the Transfigured Life. So it's been a lot of fun. I really have to say it's sometimes it's like, oh my God, we got to broadcast in 30 minutes, and I throw my hat on and things like that, comb my hair, but it's been really kind of a lot of fun, and working with Luther's been a delight. I really have to say that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I appreciate you, man. That's fine. That's kind, Father. Likewise, it's been fun. Father Jonathan is so easy to work with. Like, just
This
hands
is like
down.
that meme of like, no, you're more humble. No, you're more humble.
Yo, that's hilarious. But no, I mean, Bailey, what you're doing, man, is phenomenal. We got to talk about you, man.
Nope, the end of this. I
We
was
gotta
asking
talk-
about you. I appreciate it. No, that's really awesome. I didn't expect to get a Transfigured Life origin story. So
Yeah.
what you're saying is, in the beginning there was Luther and Father Jonathan, and it was just meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, I gave you a brief little synopsis. There's behind the scenes stuff that have occurred, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess kind of like I mentioned earlier, the topic of this is how Orthodoxy has changed our life. So I wanted to ask both of you, and then I had also some feedback, some thoughts on these questions. How has Orthodoxy changed your life? What about the way you live your life, whether it's what you do or how you think, is different now that you're Orthodox?
Well, I was born into an Orthodox family, so I guess you could say in one way I'm what a lot of people like to say is cradle. No one's born into Orthodox. We have to be humble and remember that we're all baptized and brought into the church. But I was raised in an Orthodox family and in an Orthodox community, and when we ask the question about Orthodoxy changing our life, Orthodoxy is life.
Right.
Orthodoxy is a way of life. And if you understand that, and if you follow it to the best of your ability, it becomes a way that you pray, that you eat, that you celebrate church, that you celebrate the seasonal aspect of life. Not just, I don't mean the seasons, fall, winter, summer. I mean Lent, Holy Week, post-Paschal period, and that kind of seasonal stuff. And you start to really think of life in terms of those seasons. Oh, I can't wait till next Lent, and I can't wait till this, and I can't wait till that. And I've never seen people, and I've been around other faiths, I've never seen people so excited about the cycle of life as it is in the Orthodox Church as I see around Orthodox people. We love Lent, we love Holy Week, we love theophany, and people that come into the faith. I see this especially from Roman Catholics, kind of bemoan the fact that, we gave, the Roman Catholic Church that I grew up in gave up so much, and I have it back now in the Orthodox Church. So it is kind of it is a way of life, and it's a way that we, like I said, a way we live, a way we eat, a way we pray, a way we worship, a way we deal with one another, a way we talk. It's everything. It's our whole life. Let us commend ourselves and our whole lives unto Christ our God. Well, we really live that in the Orthodox Church. And so if people are seeking a fullness, which is a word we Orthodox like to use and throw around a lot, if people are seeking a fullness to their faith, or to faith in general, to the church, to God, they're going to find it in Orthodoxy, because it's not just something that augments who and what you are. You don't change it. You don't come into it, although you do in a way. It comes into you.
Right.
And that's one way of looking at that. Luther pulled a quote on me the last time I think we recorded that I thought was really neat. That what did you say? Orthodoxy is not about.
Yeah, it's not a set of beliefs that it's not merely about just a belief system, but it's literally about becoming something.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So not
but I
just
did
about
take that from somebody.
it's about becoming something. Yeah.
So after a while, there's a rule, if it's passed around like 3 times, after the 3rd time, it's actually your quote. So
I see.
So I just got to say it one more time, then I could take full credit for the quote. Yeah, Father's spot on there. I would say like a word that comes to mind for me is incarnational. Even as I hear Father saying that, I'm thinking like, wow, Orthodoxy literally is our whole life. Like even how you plan your life, like getting off like work to try to be a part of the liturgy, taking days off. Like people take off not only days during Pascha, but like Bright Monday and other days. Like my mind is like connected with the whole liturgical calendar. You know what I mean? Whereas prior to being Orthodox, I can't even think of life being like. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, and I go, even though I cared about my faith, like I would, as a Protestant, I was reading the Bible, constantly, prayer was a little bit more sporadic than it is with Orthodoxy. And that's another thing that has changed. I think that in Orthodoxy, there's a sense of like structure and discipline that I felt like was missing for me in the tradition I was in before. So, having a prayer rule, right? Having certain prayers and psalms committed to memory, being able to, and I want to be very careful as I say this. Prayer is very hard for me, by the way, too. Like as I'm saying this, I don't want to make it seem like, but just being able to like have a rhythm of prayer, having a rhythm of like even you think about like Forgiveness Sunday, something where you're more conscious of like what you do and how it affects your life. Because where I was before, I mean, whatever you do, like, is extra credit. It's bonus because you're already saved. You're already quote unquote in. Whereas in Orthodoxy, we're on a journey, and we are really working out our salvation with fear and trembling. So there's a different aspect to that, and it changes your whole life, and your life is truly incarnational. Yes, I think that's the best way I could kind of put it to what you asked.
Yeah, to kind of spin off of what you're saying about it being truly incarnational, um, the way I've described Orthodoxy to people is it's a faith where you can come as you are, but don't stay as you are.
Right. That's it.
I like that.
So, yeah. I also, to your point, Luther, it is my daily regimen is more strict. My spiritual regimen is stricter because I have an actual routine that I didn't necessarily have before. Like you were talking about, it was kind of sporadic when you would pray and like, you have church regularly, but you don't have a full liturgical calendar necessarily. Um, also, having to develop self control because American culture incentivizes living on impulse,
Right.
and having to go to confession is a little added reminder that, hey, and everything you do, you're going to have to confess that to a priest. So that just causes, me to think a little bit more about the things that I do. Also with fasting, that's been a big thing because I was Baptist before, and Baptists don't fast. Unless it's like a trendy thing that they decided to
In
do.
January, right?
Yeah. And so like there's this whole dynamic with fasting that I've had to kind of wrestle with because coming to the church, so growing up, I was a pretty small dude. But then I wanted to change that and I started going to the gym, and in order to gain weight, you have to eat more. And so coming to the church, I was living on the bulking mentality. And then I kind of fell into the opposite extreme of just not going to the gym for a while because I was fasting. I'm like, well, that's more of a virtuous thing to pursue. And as I've gone down that path and realized, like, I can't just cut out working out. It affects me physically and mentally. Like, working out is a good thing.
Right.
So wrestling and struggling between having a balance, really aligning your life and the way you eat and the way you work out with the liturgical calendar and the way that you fast. Um, so just finding the balance there
Well, I know
has
you
been a
was hungry.
whole journey. Sorry, what was that?
No, I say like bulking up while you're fasting is tough, man.
Oh, I
I
don't
know
do
you
it.
were
Like
hungry.
I've just tried to adapt the fasting seasons to maintaining, if
Right.
possible, and then not fasting seasons to bulk. Just because I'm a thin dude and I lose weight easier than I gain weight. So that's what my routine has been recently.
Mm.
And the last thing is, I think about the dread judgment more, actually, because we have that built into the liturgical
Yeah.
calendar, and we have certain scriptural passages during the year that we read every year, um, and how to live a life pleasing to God.
Right.
That was like you were talking about Luther earlier. If you're already saved, you don't really need to do anything, and there's no real incentive to improve. Whereas in Orthodoxy is life; it affects everything. And that's why I wanted to talk about this with you guys, is
Mm.
because beyond like the apologetic stuff, like apologetics is useful, but for someone who's looking on the outside looking in, a lot of people want to know, what is it like actually being Orthodox? Like, how does it
That.
actually affect my life beyond the theological historical stuff? Like, that's good and useful, but what does it mean? What do I need to do? Like, how does it affect my life?
Right.
So that's why I want to talk to you guys about this.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good actually, because like, I mean, arguments do you so. I mean, it gets to a point where after the apologetics, all that happens, after you know church history and all that, it's like, okay, cool. Like, I'm in. Like, what do I do with what I know?
Right.
You know what I mean? That was actually one of our episodes. We, Father, what was that episode that we had? It was called, it was something about digital distraction. Um,
Yeah, yes. I'm trying to remember who our guest was on that one.
yeah, it was, oh, I know what the guest was, Father Alexander Earl. It was Father Alexander
Oh,
Earl.
yeah.
And he was talking about basically like, it was this idea of like, how to avoid distraction or like, man, it's bothering me that I don't remember. I mean, we
I'll
have like
find it.
40 something.
Just keep talking. I'll find it.
You'll find it for me. All right, but basically,
Danger of
essentially,
distraction and how to overcome it.
That was it.
the
Yeah.
the nature of distraction, how to overcome it, and it was such a great episode. Not one of our more popular ones, right? Because people show up for the tea and the apologetic stuff and all that.
Great content.
But it was great content because
I'll link it.
It was a move in a different direction for us. It was like, okay, you're in, like, cool. You know the reasons to be Orthodox, makes sense to you. Now, all right, what are you going to do now with what, this is to help. This is to help, you know, don't let technology destroy your life, and you can be with real people and you can be in the liturgy, and so I think the reason I bring that up is because at some point, like it's good to hear things for, the case for Orthodoxy, and there's a place for that. There's people still looking and inquiring, and we're going to have, obviously, we will all have content for those people so they can check that out. But for those that are in the church, that have been in the church for a while, like, let's talk about spiritual growth. Let's talk about how can we live a transfigured life or a transformed.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do too. Is like, I want to do both. I want to do the apologetics to like argue for the faith, but also I want to not be bored, and I want to like talk about the things that I'm struggling with and like things
Right.
that I see in the church that I think could be edifying for people in the spiritual life.
Mm. Yeah.
So, what was something that you expected Orthodoxy to be going in that you later learned was completely different after spending some time in the church? Kind of like expectations versus reality.
Well,
Do you want?
yeah,
Go ahead, Father.
that's a question to ask because it's going to be answered very differently by someone who converted as an adult versus someone that grew up in it all their life. But Luther, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, I go first.
Please.
Okay.
Then I get
So
my answer to build on yours.
okay. So essentially, something that we thought that the church would be that really it ended up not being. Is that what it is?
Yeah, or just how what your expectations were going in and how they were different
All right.
actually entering, and that can be positive or
Yeah.
negative.
So okay, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I thought that the church was going to be like perfect, and I know that obviously, like we know no church is perfect. Sinners are the people that are encompass the church, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, we know that in theory, but in my mind, I thought like I would never have to like think through scripture anymore. Everything has been figured out for me. Like I don't have to think anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's good. I walk in here, the church fathers, everybody has it's laid out. And then I realized like, wow, we're in Orthodoxy and sometimes people disagree. You know what I mean? And sometimes we don't get along with each other. Um, even um, even groups that are not in communion with us but are really, really close, sometimes we treat them worse than people that are a little bit further off. So like maybe sometimes someone could treat Oriental Orthodox person a lot differently than a, a Protestant. And I'm obviously that's not all the time or anything like that. It varies wherever we go. But man, I just thought like, man, I made it home, smooth sailing from here, and you know from this point forward, everything is just going to be, but like, we still have problems. You know, sometimes things are still hard. Sometimes liturgy is long, so, the expectations definitely simmered like, okay, you're here now. Like now it's time to work out your salvation, fear and trembling. Now it's time to live out this Christian life, and I can't think that it's just going to be peaches and roses. And it is going to be a struggle. We know this, right? Like it's in the Gospels. We know that this will be a fight. And so I think this is the reality now. So the expectation was this utopia of theology and whatever, to now like, okay, I'm in a real fight for my life until I make it to the end. And I'm really trying to have a crown one day, unperishable, and I have to look up to the saints to get there. So, what would you say, Father?
I think what I would echo what Luther just said, but this is what I observe as a priest: is people come in and beautiful liturgy, beautiful choir, wonderful sermons, all this kind of thing, and they encounter a faith at a very what I would call sensual level, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean what they hear, what they see, and things like that. All the things we talked about earlier about what a transfigured life means to us is kind of what it ends up meaning to them. But I end up telling the whole congregation, but especially in choirs and catechumens and people like that, like what I say to catechumens is, when you become a catechumen, you've made a decision. You've decided what you've seen and heard so far. And I usually make my catechumens wait months before I enroll them, months and months and months, if not a whole year. And I tell them, now that you've done this, you're doing a thing that's very God pleasing. You're preparing yourself to be united to the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church in its fullness. And I say to them and I say in its fullness because when you become a catechumen, the church considers you to be Orthodox, just not in the fullness of it, as evidenced by the fact that if a catechumen dies, they're buried from the church. Okay. So I say to them, you're doing something that's very God-pleasing, but you're also doing something conversely that's really going to piss the devil off. And he's going to come at you. And when you wake up on a Sunday morning and you wonder where that fight came with your spouse, when you wonder why you feel oppression and depression and all kinds of other negative feelings, when you feel things aren't going right, when you feel all these things, like what is happening, don't question it. You need to know where it's coming from, and it's certainly not coming from God. So you're doing a wonderful thing. Keep doing it. Keep on the path. You're on the path to righteousness. You're on the path to holiness. You're on the path to the kingdom of heaven. But don't be thinking that now everything is just going to get easy. If anything, it's going to get harder. And Jesus promised that. So it's not going to get easier if you become Orthodox. It's going to get harder. But God is going to give you the tools with which you can not only fight the good fight, but become triumphant in a way you have never been able to experience before.
Right.
And that's that. I think that warning, and I say it several times a year, I think is what gives people the preparation they need to have in their mind, that when this and I can't tell you how many people that have come to me when they become catechumens or when they become baptized or chrismated or whatever. Father, you were so right. I had this happen and that happened and now this, and I'm dealing with that. Wow, you really were right. Not that I'm right, but I mean, the church warns us. This is you're preparing to engage in spiritual warfare, but you're going to be given the tools to not only be victorious, to not only deal with it, but to be victorious and to conquer, as we say in one of our prayers, the fleshly foes and foes that war against us. And in that we can experience in this life triumph over the unseen forces, over the unseen spirits. We can experience triumph over them. I remind people all the time, there's a reason why in baptism we spit on the devil. We find him in contempt. We find him to be a contemptuous, ugly, horrid thing. We don't even address him directly. The priest does in the exorcism prayers, but we don't even address him directly. He's contemptuous. He's under our feet. We spit on him. He's a toothless tiger, and a toothless tiger can scare. But a toothless tiger can't really hurt you.
Yeah, that's good.
That's awesome. Yeah, I 100% agree on your point about be prepared for life to get more difficult, basically. That was not something that I sort of, there's the level of intellectually knowing something, and then there's another level of actually personally experiencing that thing that you intellectually know, that you know, but you don't know.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect life to get more difficult in the various areas that it did over the years. And that's not, again, like Father Jonathan was saying, that's not to discourage you. It's just to, give people a sober awareness of like, you're engaging in spiritual warfare in doing this. I also expected liturgical worship to be a little more foreign for a longer time, but going, consistently for a couple months, you kind of start to get the hang of it. It's not really, it's foreign for a little while when you first start going, if you're not used to that, but it's not that weird.
Yeah, let me say something about that, Bailey, because I think there's a lot of people that look at the church and they think that going in. To me, and again, this is just my own interpretation of things. To me, those churches in every jurisdiction that built their churches, this is going to sound funny, with pews, thinking they were going to Americanize their worship, I think have ended up making it harder to participate in than those churches in America that have gotten rid of their pews and where people stand and so forth, and they feel, or I think organically and intrinsically, the organic unity of the liturgy better that way. Plus, most of the churches that don't have pews are doing it in English anyway. But when you go to a church like that, there's something that just feels right. And I think people have an easier time, really, in a way, in a church that doesn't have pews and one that does, in terms of organically and intrinsically adapting to what it is they're coming into. Just an observation. I could be
Yeah, no, I
wrong.
agree. I mean, you can't make your
Ba-
Matanya
Bailey,
fully.
at this point, this is when you probably want to cut the tape because Father's about to get spicy. So I just,
It's okay. It's okay.
no, I'm kidding.
We're gonna make people angry. It's fine. They can cry about it. I'm just kidding. It'll be fine.
See, Bailey, I
Um,
would never say that on my channel, but I'll say it on yours to ruin you as much as I
It's
can. So,
totally okay. I've probably said worse things on my channel, but it's
Yeah,
fine.
after he dropped that Judaism video, I think he's maxed out on he can't
Yeah, I got in trouble on that one.
word.
Anyway, I agree with you. Is all I was going to say. That like it's difficult to make matanyas. It's difficult to make prostrations when you have a pew or a chair or
Facts.
something in front of you, and that's part of our worship. And yeah,
Yeah, Father's right there. Yeah, I agree.
and kind of piggybacking conveniently off the thing that Father Jonathan just said. I was unaware of any internal jurisdictional problems within Orthodoxy coming in. I didn't know any issues with hierarchs or reputations of this jurisdiction versus that jurisdiction. I just didn't have a topography of Orthodoxy coming in, and being in the church a little while longer, like you kind of begin to balance things and understand, like, okay, there's this happening over here, and this is why, and that's a whole rabbit hole of conversations. But it was just something that I've observed since coming in.
Bailey, I have to say about that. We have jurisdictions that kind of point at one another and say, oh, they do this or they do that, or they're ecumenist or something like that.
Right.
And we recently had a video that we had to take down with Father He Who Must Not Be Named. And when we did the video, what I tried to say to Father was, most of us don't care about ecumenism. We're not involved with it. We don't deal with it, and yet you've got jurisdictions that point fingers and call names and things like that. And humanism is not even one of them. I mean, it's one of many things. But it's done by a very vocal minority. I don't think the interjurisdictional differences are as big as among the laity as I think they may be among the hierarchy. Maybe they're more aware of it. I don't think the laity are aware of it at all. They go to Sunday of Orthodoxy Vespers with all kinds of bishops there and priests from different jurisdictions, and their brothers and sisters from other parishes. And I've heard from many, 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 many people over the decades. They think that's wonderful. They think that's Orthodoxy united and all of that kind of thing. And isn't this great? Kumbaya. And it's really something that we don't start to see as different until you start ascending into the hierarchy, where there are legitimate differences that we can't overcome. But among the laity, I don't think the interjurisdictional thing is as known, cared about, or understood really to any degree that matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What has been difficult about being Orthodox? Speaking of life getting more difficult, what specifically has been difficult?
Being faithful to that life we just talked about. Being faithful to it. And see, in Orthodoxy, you're accountable for it. You're accountable. Well, that's why we go to priest for confession. People probably are looking at me right now, go, well, Father, how do you go to confession? Well, I go to a priest. I mean, yeah, priests go to priest, or and bishops go to whoever, bishops, monks. So everybody goes to confession. The biggest patriarch in the world will go to somebody for confession. So we're all accountable to somebody, and that someone is placed in the position they are, so that they can, as one of the prayers says, give testimony for what you say before Christ. You're confessing to Christ, and the priest says, I'm just a witness who is here to bear testimony, and all that. So I think accountability, and being realistic and holding yourself accountable for this life that you've willingly taken on, and all of its responsibilities and duties and rights and things like that, or whatever. Being accountable is probably, to me, the biggest issue.
Yeah. I agree with Father. So just to kind of piggyback off what Father just mentioned, it is a challenge to be faithful. Fasting is hard. praying is hard, some days than others, right? Also being considerate of every decision you make. Cause like, even like with what Bailey mentioned a moment ago, he said he's more aware of the judgment. And, we say it in the liturgy too, right? We pray and we recognize, that we need mercy before, the great judgment seat of Christ, right? There's an aspect when you leave the church, you see the judgment icon on your way out. You know what I mean? You're reminded where you're stepping into. And so like, we will give an account for how we lived our lives. So you don't want to like live recklessly, right? You don't want to be someone that's not considerate of the gifts and talents God has given you. So this whole thing is hard, right? But thankfully we have support. Like Father mentioned, you have your priest you can talk to confess with. You have brothers and sisters in Christ to help you along in the journey. These things help. We have the mystery, right? So we have so much that can help us. Yeah. So I would say that, I mean, the scripture said we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against spiritual wickedness in high places. And so there is an aspect where, this battle is bigger than just what we're seeing, but thank God for his grace. And the goal is just that we continue on faithfully, to the end. So.
Yeah, for me, I would definitely agree with you. Keeping consistent, not losing fervor. That's definitely difficult at times. And, it waxes and wanes depending on the season. But keeping consistent and realizing that orthodoxy is from the moment you join, from the moment you become Orthodox to the moment you die, it's a journey, and that can be, God willing, a long time. Especially if like all these people that are converting at young ages, you're going to be Orthodox for a long time, God willing.
Right.
And so you have to pace yourself and make sure that you're not taking on more than you can handle and then burning out. Another thing that's been difficult for me at certain times has been not compromising in a work context. Um,
That is hard. Yeah.
yeah,
That's hard.
and I don't want to go too into specifics with certain things, but in the work environment, you have people who are not who don't share your faith, or maybe don't have a faith, or maybe have a completely different worldview. That can be, worldviews collide, whether it's what we're having for lunch, or just what the office is talking about today, and what do you think about what the office is talking about today. And you don't want to know what I think about what the office is talking about. um yeah, just that can be difficult at times. The other thing would probably be being the only Orthodox member of my family at the moment. Um, and I know a lot of people are going through that to some capacity. I don't think it's really that much of a secret, but I mean, at least to some degree, I at least sort of started my channel for members of my family to kind of understand why I became Orthodox. And then I ended up doing more, and they probably got burnt out by all the stuff that I'm making. But anyway, that's been, you want, when you're Orthodox, you want everyone to experience the
Of
beauty that is
course.
Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And then obviously that includes your family, that includes your friends, that includes people that are close to you. And there just feels like there's a division that you can't really articulate and you can't really explain, but there's a rift, and you want that to not be the case, basically.
Bailey, let me add something. The question you asked was, what do we find difficult? But I'll mention something in the opposite of that, but kind of related to what we're talking about. One of the things Orthodoxy offers people is the knowledge that when you fall, you get up, you go to confession, and you continue on. If you fell again, get up, go to confession, continue on. Oh, you fell again? Okay, get up, go to confession. Okay, repeat ad nauseum until the Lord comes again. The reason I say that is that I think a lot of people come from confessions, church traditions, faith traditions, where, boy, you fall that one time and you're just an evil demonic person not worthy of the kingdom, and when we ought to kick you out of our church right now. There's no way to deal with fallenness and brokenness in many other church traditions. I'm not saying all, but I'm saying in many, there's no way to deal with this. James says confess your sins to one another, and most Protestants will point to that, for example, and then I ask them, well, when have you confessed your sins to another person? Oh, I've never done that. Well, okay, we do, and you complain about it. So we have a mechanism in our church where people who fall can continuously seek and find forgiveness from God, as pronounced by the priest, the absolution that's pronounced by the priest, and sort of, you might say, wipe the slate clean, although I hate that expression, and get up and just start again.
Right.
And I think that gives hope to a lot of people that they're going to have not just anybody, but a priest, a father in Christ, who is going to be there forever. Even if it's not Father Jonathan, it'll be someone else after him, who will be there to walk that journey with them, and when they fall, be there to help them get up and continue on. And I don't think many other faith traditions really have that mechanism, not like we do. And I think in many ways ours is, by virtue of how it works, is very superior. And like I said, it gives people hope that just because they sinned, just because they fell, that they're not bad people. They are saints. They are called to be saints, and they are on a path that God wants them to reach. They are on a road, and there's a finish line ahead, and God wants them to cross that finish line. So I think knowing that, and knowing that there is a mechanism to fix when bad things happen, can be very helpful to people.
Yeah. And to piggyback off what Father said, I think when he used that word superior, I think more so like, I know the essence of what he means by that. I think more so like effective, right? Because I think, because like to us, we want to have a state of like prostration. Like we are low to the ground. So we're not knocking anybody with that, but Father's spot on that. It is effective. Like this idea that there really is healing in Orthodoxy. And like I noticed, like it's just the mindset shift is so different. Like from where I came from before, like it was more so like a courtroom, right? Where Orthodoxy is seen as like a hospital for sinners, right? And Christ is our great physician, where we find true healing, And so it's such a blessing to be able to come and share with the priest, before God, like what's really happened, right? And then even getting that insight and wisdom of how you can, like, it's almost like the medicinal wisdom of what he's giving you, so you can, get up from where you are. I've been immersing myself in the book of Proverbs, and something that I constantly see is just like this idea of like grace and mercy and the cause and effect of what you do. And I feel like that only makes sense in Orthodoxy. Without Orthodoxy, it would feel like a weight of judgment. Man, I'm not humble like Proverbs tells me to be, or Proverbs 15:1 tells me a soft answer turns away wrath. Like, man, I screwed up here. But Orthodoxy, like this way of living, this orthopraxy that we're called to live through, like the context fits well in the Orthodox paradigm. We have a way that we can live out this life. So, yeah, man, I encourage people to run to the hospital. You know what I mean? And even how we look at, you just go, and when you start having that lens with Orthodox Christianity, other texts start just making a whole bunch of sense, right? Like even the Good Samaritan story. I'm thinking like the innkeeper, like that's another analogy of like this hospital, and we're getting healing and help, right? The
there's so
prodigal
much
son
scripture
story.
that
Go ahead.
there's so much scripture that just makes sense when you're Orthodox, whereas when I was Protestant, there were just so many things that I glazed over and didn't think about or didn't understand, and it clicks when you're Orthodox.
Clicks. That's
Okay, so I have the same set of questions, but I'm going to ask them exclusively to you, Father Jonathan. So not to put you
I'm
on the
done.
spot.
Boom.
I want to ask these questions to you about essentially rather than what it's like been becoming Orthodox, what it's like been becoming a priest and how that has affected your life. So, how has the priesthood changed your life, Father Jonathan?
Well, um, some of the most glorious highs I've ever known in life, and some of the most horrible lows I've ever known in life have come from being a priest. And they come because you're not just living your own life. You're not just going down the road that you choose and you plan and you prepare. When I got out of seminary, when I was in seminary, I used to brag about, oh, I'll never live in New York. I'll never be in the diocese of New York and New Jersey. I'll never say never, because I ended up doing everything I said I wasn't going to do. So you're kind of, picked by God, sent by God, placed by God someplace where you got to bloom where you're planted, and it may not be where you want to be. I'm not saying I don't want to be on Long Island. I love being on Long Island, but it's not what I foresaw. It's not what I thought was going to happen, and that's fine, by the way. But you really have to prepare as a priest to live a life where God directs you, where God sends you, where God wants you to be. It's like He says to you, "I need you over here." And sometimes you don't know how long that's going to last. And it could be all your life. You'll be here all your life. Then you'll be here a couple of years, then you'll be here, then you'll be here, then you'll be here, which is the life other priests lead. So that's one aspect of it, is that you really don't have a lot of control over that, because you certainly don't have any control once you get to a parish over how the people are or the conditions that you find yourself in. When I agreed to be ordained a priest, because I really wasn't seeking it. My bishop kind of talked me into it, strong-armed me into it. I was going to be sent to a mission that was 30 miles, half an hour east from where I was living and from where the church I was attending and serving as a deacon was. And when I got there, what I found was the previous Sunday, they had about 5 people in attendance. They had only about 20 on their rolls, and most of them didn't come to church. I didn't find out till weeks into being there that they actually had teenagers. The teenagers just didn't want to come. They had no church school. They had no altar servers. They had 3 people that sang in what they called a choir. $17,500 in the bank. Well, I mean, God bless them. They did the best they could, but it was nothing spectacular. There was no one to lead them. And $17,500 in the bank in a takedown setup situation in a Presbyterian church. So when I got there, I said to them, I formulated 6 goals. And I said, if we don't accomplish these 6 goals within the next 3 years, we might as well just shut everything down, because this is too hard to keep going, on any kind of permanent basis. Thank God in those 3 years, we accomplished those 6 goals. We found property, we raised money, we grew certain ministries within the church. We did a lot of things that got us out of what I call phase 1, which was survival mode for those first 3 years. Then we spent maybe the next 10 years stabilizing the church. And then we've spent the time since then, I would say, growing the church. So there's never been any year that has been easy. There's never been any year when finances were real good and attendance was real good and this was real good and that was real good, until the last 2 or 3 years. I wouldn't trade the last 2 or 3 years, when we've had an influx of over 24 people. I wouldn't trade the joy of seeing the church grow and blossom and bloom over the last 3 years over any of the previous, however long I've been there, 27 years. So living the life of a priest is living a life of what would be the opposite of expectations? Unexpectations. A life that you really can't control much, but really, really, really have to remind yourself again and again and again that you're dependent on God. It's not you, it's God. It's God working through you. It's God I would sometimes not, because I had to always have a secular job until just a couple of years ago when I retired from the secular job. I would sometimes have not, I would be doing so many other things, if not for the family, if for church administration and, busyness stuff at the church. I would forget to do the sermon. And I'm driving to church on Sunday morning and I'm praying, Lord, I don't know what exactly I'm going to say. I know the passage, I read it, but I don't know exactly what I'm going to say. Please, Lord, give me the words they need to hear. Give me the words they need to hear. And literally when the gospel was being finished, I would be saying that. And I would stand in front of them and begin with, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, glory to Jesus Christ. And I would just start preaching. And whatever came out was what he needed me to say. And I know that because I've heard people say, I'm not, I hate talking about myself when I do this, but I've heard people say over the years, Father, that was a really good sermon. I really needed to hear that. Those words really spoke to me today. Well, where did they come from? Because I didn't practice them. I asked God to give them to me because the week went by and I didn't have time to prepare one. So we have clergy that, they have jobs outside the church. They may live far away. They may, have small congregations where there's no what I would call critical mass of people to get everything done that he would like to do. So you find yourself concentrating on doing things that you need to do that are fundamental to the survival and well-being of the parish. But you can't do everything you want until you have that critical mass. And then when things start to grow, when you start getting more people, we have more people now attending the church than we've ever had since at least the 90s. And I think we've exceeded those numbers recently. So we have attendance more often than not that's higher than we've ever had, more money stewardship coming in than we've ever had. So now we're able to do more. Now we're able to start doing more. Now we're able to tell people, start dreaming. We haven't been able to dream for a long time. Now start dreaming, because now we can start doing things we've only dreamed about in the past. Let's dream some more and make them happen now. So those are some thoughts about things that are hard.
I'm thinking about an Orthodox school one day.
Oh, that's on my list. Yeah, most definitely.
Love it.
So you've been at the same parish the whole time?
Been the same parish for 32 years. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I'm a rarity, actually, in that sense. Not every priest is like that. There's a lot of there's a lot of advantages to it, especially with the church that I'm in now. I could not imagine leaving them in the first 10 to 15 years that they needed, because the church was founded in 1983. I got there in May of 1993. So it was formed in 83. I got there in 93. I was the 5th priest in less than 10 years. So that was one of the reasons why they had so many problems forming into a community, because they kept changing leadership every year or 2 years. And that's the kiss of death when you're trying to plant something from the start. You need someone to really stay there about the first 7 years. And once it's planted, and once it's, it starts to bloom and blossom, and things are in place, then maybe he can leave and another guy can come in. But that's not what happened where I went. And I knew that intrinsically, and that I had to make a commitment to stay there in order to make it work. And I'm so glad I did, because the vast majority of the parish now are converts. And I don't know where they would have gone if we didn't exist. I'm sure God would have taken care of them, but they've come to us, and we have a parish now that is attracting more and more and more and more converts, which is really kind of cool. And when I got there, that's what I thought the church would eventually be. It was a church full of mostly cradle Orthodox, but I envisioned at one point in time that it would become a church of mostly converts, and that's kind of what's happening.
So they had to deal with your dad jokes for 32 years?
What's that?
They had to deal with your dad jokes for 32 years?
Oh, only since Facebook.
So, just out of curiosity, do you just sweet talk your bishop into letting you stay, or how does that work?
Well, in our jurisdiction, in the Orthodox Church in America, there's more of a tradition of leaving a priest there unless he asks to move. I think we have more of that than you see in the Antiochians or Greeks. And I may be generalizing, and I certainly may be wrong, but I I do see more of a willingness in those two jurisdictions to move priests around than I do in ours. And I could be wrong. That's just based on anecdotal evidence that I observe. I don't think either way is bad, but I think there are certain communities where the priest needs to stay there until the possibility exists for him to leave in a healthy way, in a way that's good and positive for the parish, and doesn't represent such a disruption of emotional pain and all kinds of other things because the beloved priest is leaving. I'm not saying me. I'm just saying in those parishes where that happens, that I think that there has to be a healthy break. I think it is true that a priest could stay someplace too long. But I think again, looking at my particular church, and my work is not done there. I want to get certain things done before I do retire. So they're stuck with me for a little bit while longer. And they know that.
That's awesome. So, what was something that you maybe, I know you kind of mentioned that your bishop, I think you said it was your bishop that kind of coerced you into becoming a priest?
Um, what he said to me, the church I'm at now, when I was a deacon back in 1982, 83, whatever it was, 92, 91, 92, said to me, we have this mission out in what was then called Yaphank, a small village in Long Island. And he said, it's dying. And he said, I'm going to close it if I can't find someone to go there. And he's looking right at me, and I kind of sunk back in my chair and I said, well, Ladik, I sure hope you find someone to send there. and he asked me point blank if I had thought about becoming a priest. And I said, after thinking about it for about a millisecond, no. But we talked and had several conversations, and he had me talk with some senior priests in the diocese to kind of butter me up or whatever. But and I looked out there and I said, it would be sad to close it, because the way we live on an island and people who live in Queens and Brooklyn move to Nassau County. Nassau County moves out to Suffolk County. Western Suffolk County moves out to where the mission is. It's just the demographics are just flowing eastward. And I I knew it would be that the church was situated in a place where, if you look on a map of Long Island, there are 4 Greek churches on the North Shore and on the South Shore, forming a rectangle, the 4 corners of a rectangle. And if you draw a line straight through it, that center dot is where the mission was. So we were the only English language church, still are, outside of our sister parish and our mother parish in Dix Hills. We therefore serve a purpose. We have a purpose for existence. And the parish was founded for the purpose of being an English language mission. So that's what we're trying to live up to. And I think that's why people come to us, is that we are the only English language church in Eastern Suffolk County.
I guess so. What was your kind of expectations versus what it actually was like being a priest going in? What was your expectations?
Well, I had served liturgically for a year and a half as a deacon, so I sort of kind of had that and under my wing. And I love serving liturgically, so I don't think there was anything there. I think the expectations were more of, can this church live? This church I was being sent to, can it live? Can it be finally planted, get out of the Presbyterian church and plant us someplace and grow from there? Because we certainly weren't going to grow in a set-up, take-down situation in a Presbyterian church. They did not want us there any longer, especially when it got to the point where we started getting more attendees than they had. I think at that point problems started, because some of their people would. What's that?
I said it was getting spicy. They're like, you having more members than us.
Some of their parishioners started coming to our service.
Wow, that's interesting.
Oh, this is really nice. And well, you're welcome, but you got to deal with your pastor first. But we, so I knew we had to get out of it. So I wrote something in before I agreed to be ordained. I ended up writing what I called a vision statement that I gave to my bishop, and I said, Vladika, if you approve this, this is my plan for what I'm going to do when I get there. It was like, I don't know, 11 or 12 pages long, and it dealt with everything. How the parish council was going to be organized, how I would do church school and youth ministry, and I don't know, whatever else. It was really a plan for how I was going to govern the church. And he blessed it. And he said, yes, I bless this. You can do this. Now, can I ordain you? And once we kind of had an agreement in place, because I said, I can't do this without your backing. I can't do this without your blessing and your backing, Oh, you will have it. So, okay. Then, and now that I had it, I said to my wife, you ready? She said, no. And I went ahead and got ordained. So, and so when I got out there, I shared that vision with the parish council and with others. And I said, this is what we're going to do. And they were so desperate at the time to make it work that they agreed to anything and everything I said. So I had it easier than some people did, than some priests did going into their situations. I mean, at first they were not incorporated. They had no bylaws. I wrote the bylaws. The bylaws still exist that I wrote, and I'm the only one that can change them according to the bylaws. The priest is the only one that can change the bylaws.
Some Pope stuff.
No, so I did stuff that I had to do because I had to get this train back on tracks and moving. And that took a little bit of a strong personality. Not something I'm known for, of course. But and over the years, we lost people who just didn't like my style or whatever. We had people who came and said, "Oh, I'm going to leave. Why?" Well, the Slavic people who said, "Oh, this church is too Greek," and then I had a lot of Greek people who were coming who left after a while and said, "Oh, this church is too Russian." I'm trying to think, what does each side see that I don't see? But that's fine because you don't want people sticking around who can't work with you. And these people that left couldn't work with me, and that was fine. And I always found that for every person God took away from us, God gave us two in return. God would take one and two would appear. I like to tell this story, so forgive me for taking a moment here. From January of 2004 to the summer of 2005, so in that year and a half period, 18-month period, we lost 30 people. Now, we lost them all to moves. These were all families, for the most part, with 2.3 kids and all that kind of thing, and they up and moved away, moved out of the state, moved off of the island. And I was, we had about 90 active people by then. And that was a third of our membership. That was a huge, huge hit in 18 months. Come 2006, so a year and a half, we lost 30 people in a year and a half period. And I literally was on my knees praying, Lord, what do I do now? Come January of 2006, within 6 months, he brought us 30 new people.
Wow.
So I've learned that God will provide, but I've also learned something else. That God will not bring you people to your church if you're not ready to receive them. Well, let me repeat that. God will not bring people to your church if you are not ready to receive them. That meant we had to do things that a lot of people in the church didn't know about or like or understand. Why do we have to have greeters, Father? People just walk in, they grab candles, they light candles. They don't need anybody saying hello. Yes, they do. Why do we have to do this, Father? Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to? Because we want to grow. We want to welcome and we want to grow. And that even includes having facilities that are as best as you can present to the public, and doing the best you can in liturgy, doing the best you can with preaching, with singing, with whatever. If you're not ready to receive people and they're going to come and not experience the audio-visual extravaganza that your church, Hagia Sophia and a telephone booth is, you've got to be ready to receive people and to offer them God's best as you can present it, and not take for granted that things will just somehow work themselves out. So we've tried to be very attentive to that especially over the last 10, 15 years. And I think it's beginning to really pay off for us.
You saying that, Father, reminds me of a conversation Bailey and I had, or just this idea of how churches post their services online. And, I guess to each his own, right? But it's just a little bit different when you put a little effort into what you're doing. So like you have other people that will post their sermons. Like I think of like Father Barnabas Powell or Father Moses McPherson sermons, where it's like there's a little bit more intentionality and effort in them. And this is like no shade to anyone that just kind of just throws their whole service online. But like just that intentionality sometimes is important with what you're doing. Like you can't just wake up and just say, all right, like we just gonna, I'm not gonna prepare this for this sermon. I'm not gonna, there's moments, right? But I'm just saying like intentionality is always, important.
And it's intentionality with having the choir practice. It's intentionality with practicing with the altar service. It's intentionality with having, taking even little things like making sure when liturgy starts, there's not little candle butts in the candle stands from the last service. It's intentionality in how you prepare the bulletin and how clean the church is, and things like that. It's really being intentional about everything. And trying to think of not overlooking anything. Because when someone comes in who's never been to your church before, you don't know what they're looking at. And I even have pointed out to people, the guys don't get it, although the women do. You have to have clean bathrooms, for example. And when a woman goes to use the bathroom in the church, she's going to be drawing opinions about what pride you take in the facilities by how clean the bathroom is. For example, men, again, this is something men don't really appreciate, but women do. So you really have to think about how you're coming across to anybody who walks in, how you're coming across the kids. Kids are the best, by the way. That's why I love the Orthodox liturgy, because I call it an audiovisual extravaganza, because it's full of sound and color and light and, with candles and incense. So they smell, they hear, they see. It's really amazing how kids can take it all in. And what do most parishes do? Like mine, no matter how many times I scream about this, they put all the kids in the back. And who's in front of the kids? Adults. Do they ever use the chairs that they're there? No, they stand up the whole service. So the kids are behind walls of people, and they can hear a little bit, and they can see a little bit, maybe smell a little bit. I don't know, but their senses are very limited being in the back.
Right. Put them in the front.
Which is why I hope no one from St. John's is watching right now, which is why I'm taking the chairs out in the future. So we don't have this nonsense anymore.
Preach, Pastor, preach.
Okay, so what was, forgive me if I'm reiterating kind of like the same thing. What did you expect going in?
I had no expectations.
No expectations.
I kind of liken how I went into it like a man being in a kayak or a canoe or something going down the rapids and not quite knowing where the next waterfall is, and just avoiding the rocks and doing the best to keep the ship afloat and keep picking up survivors in the river along the way and filling them in the canoe. That's kind of what I expected it to be, and I have not been disappointed. But like I said earlier, unexpectedly, some of the highest highs and lowest lows I've ever experienced in life were in parish life as a priest.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's probably, I mean, I'm not a priest, so I wouldn't know, but I feel like that's probably the best way to go into the priesthood is not having expectations and just whatever is, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, I know what you mean, because we set our own expectations, and God's up in heaven going, you think so, don't you? Yeah, okay. So we have to really rely on him, because we are as clergy, we are his agents. We are. I know clergy say this as a manner of speaking. They talk about my flock, my church. It's not your flock; it's the flock entrusted to your care. It's not your church; you're a steward of it. So are all the people that go there. A lot of my people understand this, that we're stewards of that which has been entrusted to us. And for the clergy, it's not just the church building and all that, it's all the people in it. According to Hebrews, we have to give account for everybody's soul in that church on the day of judgment. That scares the hell out of me. I take that very seriously.
Yeah. I I would too. I would be like, I'm not going to become a priest because I don't want to be in charge of souls. That's terrifying. No thanks.
It is terrifying, yeah, and
Yeah.
it really should humble any priest any man who desires to go into the priesthood. It really should humble them.
Yeah. Okay, so one other question for you, Father Jonathan, on the topic of the priesthood and people considering that. What if people were considering the priesthood? What advice would you give them if they're trying to discern that path?
Um, it's a great question. I think it will be different for men in general because men are coming from different backgrounds and educational bases and things like that. But I would say if you're in parish life, especially if you've converted and you think that this faith is wonderful, I want to serve it, I want to go to seminary, stay in parish life for 3 years and work closely with the priest and either serve in the altar or sing in the choir, but don't stand in the pew if you're thinking of becoming a priest one day. You've got to learn one or the other. I sang in choirs. I never really liked serving in the altar until I was a deacon, but because I felt by singing in the choir, I got to learn the liturgy. I got to learn the services, because you sing the hymns, and the choirs sing 70% of what's going on in any liturgy. And serving in the altar is very simple. Little entrance, great entrance. Okay, we give this priest the censer when he gives you the little signal, and that's easy stuff. The choir was a lot harder. So I feel like I learned my liturgy there. I didn't learn my liturgics there, but I learned liturgy there. So either serve in the altar with the priest or sing in the choir and make yourself available to do the things that the priest has to do so that you learn from him. And that's going to include receiving from him obediences to do things that he might normally do, but that you could free him up for. For example, all my altar servers don't know this, and this is March 2025, and if you're going to air this in May 2025, they will already have done this. I'll make sure of that. But I'm going to tell them all very soon to buy a bottle of gun barrel cleaning oil, because I'm going to give them each a censer, and I'm going to say, clean this, because this is going to take the carbon off of everything that's built up over this censer over the years. We need to clean sensors. We need to clean a bunch of other stuff, and we're going to start cleaning. And they're going to start helping do that, because these are things that the priest has to oversee. He has to oversee the cleanliness of the altar and the sacred space up there and things like that. And he needs help. It can't all be done by one person. So sing the altar, serve in the choir, sing in the altar. Yeah, he'll do that too. Sing in the choir, serve in the altar, and make yourself available to work with the priest. Go with him on home blessings, go with him on hospital calls. Learn this stuff. Oh, that's boring. Well, then you don't belong in the priesthood if you think that stuff is boring. And learn to love what he loves doing. And then see if that's the kind of thing you want to do for the rest of your life. Because you don't retire from being a priest. You retire from active parish life, but you never retire from being a priest. Always remember that.
Wow.
Okay, so I have one last question for both of you guys. What advice would you give to catechumens or new converts to help them transition to Orthodoxy?
Ooh, Luther, go for it.
This is more. I will let the priest handle this one.
Luther, you've been quiet for a little while. It's your turn to answer the question. Father Jonathan put you on the spot. You have to answer.
It was priest mode. I was on autopilot enjoying this. Advice for catechism. I would say, I would really say, like, to experience the liturgy, to try to go to all the services as much as you can. Don't just like read your way into Orthodoxy, even though like reading is good, books are good. But it is very easy to like try to like make this a theological pursuit in your mind, and also not just like into like fight wars. Like, man, if I could redo a lot of things, I wouldn't be arguing with family. I wouldn't be like trying to put the Orthodox flag posted down, like Orthodoxy has won the war. Don't do anything of that. Don't do any of that, because that can possibly rob you of joy and appreciation of living the Orthodox life. I spent a lot of time doing some of that stuff, and so learn from my mistakes. I've argued with family, friends, like old pastors, like this, that, and it's like, and granted, like not all the time, but there's been my moments, and they weren't fulfilling. And there's a joy of just living out the Orthodox life. Like, so I would say, go to church, go to as much of the divine liturgy as you can, practice it as much as you can. I think there's a saint, I can't remember the name of the saint, but basically it talks about like early on you should be, like very zealous, like live out with zeal. Whereas if you start off lax early on, then it's going to be really, really rough for you later. So he says it's very important to like you dive in. And when I say that, like obviously, like talk to your priest when I mention this. But when I say dive in, I mean like be committed to the things that you said you were going to be committed to. So whether that's the liturgy, whether that's going to confession, whether that's reading the scriptures, the things that if your priest gave you a prayer rule, if you've been inscribed certain things, do those things. Don't like try to wait till you're like, I don't know, chrismated, baptized, to now take your faith seriously. Like, take it seriously. So that's just my little advice. But I will hand it to my virtual priest here.
Well, Luther brings up a very good thing about attending the services. I tell the catechumens to attend Vespers and other services, not just liturgy. They've got to be steadfast in their Sunday attendance. That's true. But we're not a Sunday-only phenomenon. We are a church that has a liturgical life outside of Sunday, so it's important to attend the other services. That's one. So I agree with Luther on that wholeheartedly. You can read your way into Orthodoxy, but you will never become Orthodox reading your way into Orthodoxy, which leads to point number 2, which is you will never argue anybody into the kingdom. So if that happens to a lot of converts. I've had some in my church where they're just so excited. They found this faith, and they take people by the shoulder and they say, I want to tell you why I'm going to become Orthodox. These people are like, okay, why you became it. I don't know what's for me. I can see what it's doing to you. I don't want what it's doing to you to do to me. You're never going to argue someone into the kingdom. So don't even try. Right. Jesus said, I will draw all men to myself. So if St. Innocent of Alaska, writing a letter to a young priest he was going to send out into the hinterlands of Alaska, he wrote him a letter, and one of the things he said in there was just remember that someone coming to the Lord is not by your work or effort, but is through the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, you still have to put out the work and effort, but don't think that when someone converts that they're doing it because of you. It's God that has drawn them to himself. The third thing I would tell, related to that I would tell especially young men, don't worry about your girlfriend or spouse coming with you at the same time. Be an Orthodox man in all the fullness and glory of being an Orthodox man, an Orthodox Christian man. Show your wife how much you love her more, respect her more, honor her more, love her more as an Orthodox Christian man. Show her how much this new life and this new faith means to you by learning how to serve her. And you'll see, if you can do all that, and pray over meals and pray at home, even if she doesn't pray with you at first. Just be steadfast in living an Orthodox Christian life without having to preach it. Live it. And if you do that, women notice. And their timing is not our timing, the timing of men. They notice these things, and they may come around if you don't badger and bother them to do so. They have to make it of their own accord. And be patient in that sense. Your kids, your spouse, your whoever, your parents, whoever, they're not going to see what you see right away. But if you start living that life, then that's what they're going to see. Oh, this faith, look, honey, look how much of a difference it makes to little Johnny here. They'll start to notice. So live the faith, be the faith, live it honestly and openly. and don't be hypocritical and double-minded about that. Being one thing in church and another thing at home, for example, you can't do that. That doesn't work. They'll see through that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would second definitely what both of you have said about you're not going to argue anyone into the faith. Now, I will say there are certain times when there are people who have questions and people who are
Okay.
open and want to have discussions, and at that point you can bring out, kind of the apologetic type stuff. Um but for someone who's not seeking it actively, that's not going to be useful for them. So you really have to know your audience and where people are. Um I think Father Michael from Living Orthodox did a video on this recently on this exact topic. Is like, when people convert to Orthodoxy and they're overzealous and they freak people out about it, that could be more detrimental because it could push them away from the faith because they're not ready for it. And you have to know your audience and know when people are ready for it. And what Father Jonathan's talking about is you can preach orthodoxy without using words. You can do that in a more subtle way by living it rather than, you know,
Arm wrestling
citing the
someone.
canons of the Seventh Ecumenical Council at your Presbyterian dad or something.
Yeah, and I think that's also maybe a fourth thing I would add to what I just said a moment ago. Not everybody, just because they've encountered the faith and are learning the faith and want to embrace the faith, are good at arguing the faith. So just because you found orthodoxy doesn't mean you have to start your own YouTube channel next month. You may not be ready for that. Teaching is a spiritual gift, and not everybody necessarily has that. Not every priest necessarily has that, although it's supposed to be one of our charisms. You just have to be very careful about understanding whether you're ready then to start engaging with anybody in any polemic or apologetic or anything like that, because you could do harm to yourself and you could do harm to the person you're talking to by not knowing what to say or how to say it or anything like that. Those are two different things. What to say and how to say it, are definitely two different things. And you can master one and not the other. You've got to master both to get on with someone. I'm not talking about podcasting. I'm talking just one-on-one. You got to have both to know how to explain things. And a lot of times we try to repeat things we've read in books. Oh, yeah, I read this thing, and oh gosh, if only here, read this book, and then that's not the way really we do apologetics. We have to be able to defend the faith. St. Paul says that we have to be ready to give account for the hope that is within us. And that means, really, quite frankly, there's no other way to say this: shut up, learn from your priest, go to Bible study, go to the services, and just learn. And don't expect to be a YouTube podcasting apologist guy within the next month or two. It just doesn't work that way, and it shouldn't work that way.
Yeah. As far as any advice that I have for converts or new converts or catechumens, kind of in contrast to what Luther said earlier, obviously immerse yourself in the services, but also take your time and don't be overzealous. Don't give yourself an hour prayer rule. Like, don't do things that you're going to not be able to sustain a week, a month, a year. Again, remember, this is something that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, and you're going to be growing and doing more. And if you don't have room to do more, like if you're lifting 500 pounds immediately, you're probably not. First of all, you're probably not going to lift it. Second of all, you're definitely not going to lift 600 pounds next week because you broke your back. So,
Bailey, I want to hop in. I agree 1,000% what you're saying. So I wasn't saying that someone has to do 5,000 prostrations or anything like that. I meant like what you're doing in your faith, like as prescribed with your priest, like, don't forsake it is what I meant. Like, don't just say, I'm not going to,
I didn't think you meant like, don't.
Yeah.
I know what you meant. I was just trying to nuance it in a different way. Yeah.
But yeah, you're completely right though. You don't want to like put too much weight on the bar, because then you could go into, despair or something. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You take too much on and you'll burn out sooner than later. And then once people burn out and they drop their prayer rule or whatever they do, then it's very hard to pick it back up.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And the saints.
Another thing is to not make an idol out of the church or your image or perception of the church. Because as we kind of discussed, at least Luther and I, we had some expectations that were different from reality when we came in versus actually having lived it for a few years. So don't fall into that trap. That's not to say don't look up to the church. You should, but don't make it like Luther said, don't plant the flag.
Catholicism is destroyed. Protestantism. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing would be to just go to confession as often as you're able, because that's how you will actually grow.
Right.
Very true. There, because the act of confession requires us to acquire so many virtues, but most of all, it requires us to be humble. And like that old saying, being able to see yourself as you truly are is a greater feat than raising the dead. It is a verse that I remember quite often when it comes to things like that. And the Orthodoxy helps us see ourselves as we truly are. It also helps us see ourselves as we can truly be, as the saint that God calls us to be. And having that vision of who we are and who we can be, that can be quite a dichotomy, but certainly having that ability to see who we are, what we should be and what we can become, and having the tools given to us by God to be able to accomplish that, that's amazing. That's such a comfort, such a challenge, and such a joy, and such a exciting a feat. I think that the excitement that gives a lot of people, especially men, is truly remarkable.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I think that's pretty much everything I've got for you guys. If anyone is interested in hearing more of what Luther and Father Jonathan have to say, I think you guys should do more stuff together where you're allowed to talk, because I know you guys do a lot of interviewing and this has been a really good conversations. I think more people need more of this kind of dynamic on the Transfigured Life.
You heard that, Father? He said we got to do more 2-on-2s like we used to.
Luther,
we're working on that. Yeah.
When we started the channel, it was just you and me, and we thought, hey, let's invite this guy on and talk to him, and then it steamrolled from there, and
it did.
Here we're known as the interviewing guys or whatever. But yeah, Luther and I have talked about doing more talking of just ourselves, and we look forward to kind of doing that more in the future coming up.
Yeah,
great, awesome. Well, people should go subscribe to the Transfigured Life if they're not already. And if you guys have anything else you want to add or plug as we're wrapping up, you can go ahead and do that.
Thank you again, Bailey, and everybody should subscribe to Unto Ages, and we're going to be putting those links on our site too.
Thank you,
I
brother.
appreciate you, Bailey. Yeah, if I could just brag on Bailey real quick, Father, this dude he's awesome. I would say out of all the content creators, I probably talk to Bailey like the most, like every other day. It feels like. So he's really become like a true friend. He's a great guy. So I appreciate him.
Amen. And thank you, Bailey, for the invitation for Luther and I to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you guys both for coming on, and it's been a great talk.